The Dr. Phil studio was shrouded in suffocating tension that afternoon during filming. The lights shone brightly on the main stage as the audience, numbering around to 100 people, silently awaited the start of another episode. But what absolutely no one could have imagined was that this wouldn't be just another episode about family conflicts. This would be the day the very integrity of the show would be put to the test, live, before cameras that would capture every second of one of the greatest professional betrayals ever seen on American television. The story began 3 weeks earlier when the production team received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to possess devastating information about manipulation of therapeutic outcomes in previous cases on the show. Initially, the production team treated the email as just another of the numerous discrediting attempts that high-profile programs regularly receive. But then came the second email, and the third, each with more details, more names, more specific dates, until, finally, came the full confession. The person behind the emails was Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a licensed family therapist who had worked as a consultant on the Dr. Phil show for over 7 years. Rebecca Thornton, 52 years old, with perfectly styled gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses, was known behind the scenes as a meticulous and reliable professional. A graduate of Columbia University with specializations in systemic family therapy and forensic psychology, she had been responsible for evaluating dozens of families who went through the program. Her work was crucial, interviewing participants before filming, developing psychological profiles, recommending approach strategies for Dr. Phil, and in many cases, providing the reports that underpin the decisions made on stage. But now, Rebecca was about to reveal that much of this work had been compromised, and she wasn't alone in the conspiracy. Sitting backstage, visibly nervous and sweating profusely even with the air conditioning blasting, was Marcus Chen, 38, associate executive producer of the show. Marcus was Chinese-American, born in San Francisco, and had built a meteoric career in television, ambitious, talented, and known for his ability to create memorable moments on television. Marcus was one of Stage 29 Productions' rising stars. But his rise, as Rebecca was about to reveal, had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and ethical betrayals that would make any mental health professional shudder in horror. The third person involved in this drama was Jennifer Walsh, 43, a single mother from Minneapolis who had participated in the program 8 months prior. Jennifer was fighting for custody of her 2 daughters, 10-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Sophie, against her ex-husband Robert Walsh. Her episode had been intense, tears, accusations, emotional clashes, and at the center of it all was the psychological report prepared by Dr. Thornton, which concluded that Jennifer had narcissistic tendencies incompatible with responsible motherhood and recommended that custody be granted to the father. The episode aired. Jennifer lost primary custody. Her life crumbled, and now she was back in the studio, still unaware that she was about to discover a truth that would change everything. Dr. Phil McGraw entered the stage as he always did, confident, direct, with that air of moral authority that had made him one of the most recognizable figures on American television. At 75, he remained imposing with his impeccable suit and magnetic presence. But that day, something was different. He had been informed by the production about Rebecca Thornton's allegations only the night before. He had spent hours reviewing emails, documents, and recordings, and he was furious. Not only because of the betrayal, but because of the fundamental violation of everything he believed in: professional ethics, public trust, and the responsibility of dealing with real lives, not just entertainment. "Welcome to Dr. Phil," he began, but his voice carried a different weight, a seriousness that the audience immediately perceived. "Today we're going to talk about trust, about integrity, and about what happens when professionals in whom we place our faith decide to put their own interests above the people they swore to help." The audience remained in absolute silence. Something was different, very different. Before we continue with this impactful story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of Dr. Phil's upcoming revelations. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what you think will happen in this case. Your opinion is very important for us to continue bringing you this exclusive content that transforms lives. Jennifer Walsh stepped onto the stage first, visibly confused as to why she was there again. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes showed the marks of months of sleepless nights. Since losing primary custody of her daughters, her life had become a nightmare of supervised visits, endless legal battles, and an agonizing pain of not being able to hold her girls before bed. "Jennifer, thank you for coming, Doctor," Phil said, and there was something in his voice of kindness, an empathy that she hadn't felt the first time. "I know the last few months have been incredibly difficult for you." "It's been hell," Jennifer replied, her voice trembling. "I wake up every day and wonder how I got here. I'm not perfect, Doctor." "Phil, I never said I was, but I love my daughters more than anything in this world. And that report said I was a narcissist, that I wasn't capable of being a good mother. It destroyed my life." Tears began to stream down her face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. The audience murmured in sympathy. Many remembered the original episode, how damning it had seemed, how the psychological report had been presented as irrefutable scientific evidence. "Jennifer, I need to ask you a very important question, Doctor," Phil continued, leaning forward in his chair. "Have you ever wondered if that report was accurate? If Dr. Thornton's assessment reflected who you really are?" "Every day," she whispered. "But she's a professional. She has credentials. Who am I to question a doctor? I thought that maybe I really was that terrible person the report described. That maybe I didn't deserve my daughters. What if I told you, Doctor?" Phil paused, letting the weight of his words fill the studio, that report might not have been an honest assessment, that it might have been manipulated to create a specific result, not based on who you really are, but on what would be most dramatic for television. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer stood paralyzed, her mouth agape in shock. The audience erupted in murmurs. And then, "Doctor." Phil gestured backstage. "Doctor. Rebecca Thornton, please come to the stage." Rebecca Thornton emerged from backstage, walking slowly, each step seeming to cost her immense effort. She didn't look at Jennifer. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and her hands trembled visibly as she sat down in the chair next to Jennifer. "Drive, Thornton, Doctor," Phil began, his voice sharp as a blade. "You've been a consultant for this program for 7 years. You've evaluated over 40 families. You've produced psychological reports that have influenced custody decisions, therapeutic interventions, and, in some cases, legal proceedings. And now you're here to tell us what, exactly." Rebecca finally looked up, and there were tears there, but also something else, perhaps relief, perhaps shame, perhaps both. "I manipulated the results," she said, her voice low but clear. "Not all of them, but many, including Jennifer's." The audience erupted. People screamed. Some stood up from their seats. Jennifer covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Phil raised his hand, asking for silence. "Explain," he ordered. "Explain exactly what you did." Rebecca took a deep breath. "When I assessed families before filming, I conducted standard interviews, administered basic psychological tests, and created a profile. But then Marcus Chen, the producer, started giving me guidelines about what he needed the reports to say." "What kind of guidance?" "He would say things like, 'We need the mother to seem more unstable,' or 'the father needs to be the hero of this story,' or 'find something that justifies a more dramatic intervention.' At first, I resisted, but Marcus was persuasive. He showed me the ratings. He said that more dramatic episodes helped more people because they reached more viewers. He said we were doing a greater good." "And you believe that, Doctor?" Phil asked, incredulous. "I wanted to believe," Rebecca admitted, and there was desperation in her voice. "I was being paid very well. My career was growing, and Marcus made it seem like it was just adjusting the results a little, emphasizing certain aspects. It wasn't lying completely," he said. "It was just creating a clearer narrative." Jennifer was trembling so violently that a stage assistant came and placed a blanket over her shoulders. "You destroyed my life," she whispered. "You took my daughters from me because of ratings." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca cried. "I'm so sorry from the bottom of my heart. What I did was unforgivable. I broke my oath. I betrayed your trust. Stop, Doctor," Phil interrupted, his voice like a whip. "Don't end that sentence with excuses. You made choices, conscious choices, and now you have to face the consequences." He turned to the main camera. "And Marcus Chen needs to face his own. Marcus, you're backstage now. Come in here, now." Marcus Chen slowly emerged from backstage, but unlike Rebecca, He didn't seem remorseful. He appeared defensive, combative, ready to fight. He wore an expensive suit, his hair was perfectly combed, and there was an arrogance in his gait that made the audience murmur with immediate disapproval. "Marcus, Doctor," Phil began. "You heard Dr. Thornton's confession. Do you have anything to say?" "Yes, I do," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "I have to say that everyone in this studio is a hypocrite. This show has always been about drama. It's always been about creating memorable television moments. And you all know that Dr. Thornton hasn't done anything that hasn't been done on every reality show on American television." The audience erupted in boos, but Marcus continued, raising his voice. "Do you think that the participants in competition programs aren't manipulated in the editing? That documentaries don't have a constructed narrative? That any TV program shows reality exactly as it is? I did my job. I created incredible television. And yes, that included working with Dr. Thornton to ensure that the stories were told in the most impactful way possible." "Are you listening to yourself, Doctor?" Phil asked, and there was a cold fury in his voice that the audience rarely saw. "Are you equating the editing of a cooking reality show with the falsification of psychological reports that influence custody decisions for real children? Don't you really see the difference?" "The difference is one a degree, not a kind," Marcus insisted. "And besides, the most dramatic cases were the ones that reached the most people. More people watching means more people receiving help indirectly. It's simple math." Jennifer has finally found her voice again. "Did you steal my babies from me for math, for ratings? You would have lost custody anyway," Marcus said, turning to her disdainfully. "We just accelerated the inevitable. And frankly, based on what I saw in your original interviews, perhaps your daughters are better off with their father." What happened next was something no one expected. Rebecca Thornton, who had been sitting in guilty silence, suddenly stood up and walked over to Marcus. She was holding something a thick, brown file folder filled with documents, and with an expression of determination no one had yet seen. She opened the folder and spread its contents out on the center table of the stage. "That's not true," she said, and her voice was now strong, clear, resolute. "Jennifer would not have lost custody. The actual report, the report I prepared before Marcus asked me to change it, concluded that Jennifer was a perfectly capable mother with some normal communication challenges with her ex-husband, but nothing that justified a change of custody." She picked up a document and showed it to the camera. "This is the original report, dated 3 weeks before the recording. And this," she picked up another document, "is the version that Marcus forced me to rewrite. Compare them. Compare every word. I changed diagnoses. I invented behaviors. I created an entire narrative of maternal narcissism that simply didn't exist in the data." Marcus paled. You couldn't have kept that. "We had an agreement. We had a criminal agreement," Rebecca replied, "and I kept copies of everything. Every email you sent me asking for specific changes. Every text message pushing for more drama. Every recording of our meetings where you explicitly instructed me to falsify results." She turned to drive. "Phil, I have everything. 7 years of evidence. And it's not just Jennifer's case. There are 43 cases. 43 families whose evaluations were compromised. Some more, some less, but all were touched by this manipulation, Doctor." Phil picked up the documents with hands that now trembled not from fear, but from utter fury. He began to read, his brows furrowing more and more with each line. The audience was so silent that you could hear their collective breathing. And then, after reading the full pages, Dr. Phil did something he had never done in 22 years of the program. He stood up, walked over to the main camera, and looked directly into the lens. "Stop the recording," he said, his voice low but laden with absolute authority. "Stop the recording now. Fire the studio. Everyone out. Everyone." There was a moment of confusion. The technical director, visible through the monitors, seemed lost. The audience began to murmur, uncertain. But Dr. Phil repeated himself, this time louder. "I said, stop recording. Everyone get out of the studio now, except Rebecca, Marcus, and Jennifer. You 3 stay. And bring the lawyers. Bring all the lawyers. This has just become much, much bigger than television." What happened in the next 3 hours wasn't broadcast to the public. The cameras were turned off. The audience was escorted out, confused and reeling from speculation. The backstage area of the studio transformed into something resembling a corporate crime scene. Lawyers coming and going, network executives making desperate calls, and at the center of it all, on the now empty and nearly silent stage, for people, Dr. Phil, Rebecca, Marcus, and Jennifer, Dr. Phil had spent the last 40 minutes on the phone with CBS's legal department and his own personal lawyers. What Rebecca had brought was not just evidence of misconduct, it was potentially evidence of fraud, falsification of medical documents, and possible obstruction of justice in custody proceedings. Marcus Chen was facing not only the end of his career, but possible criminal prosecution. "I want a deal," Marcus finally said, breaking the tense silence. He had abandoned his arrogance. Now he seemed merely frightened. "I cooperate completely. I hand over everything I know, and you don't prosecute me criminally. You're not in a position to negotiate," one of the lawyers replied coldly. "But I'll pass on your offer." Rebecca was sitting with Jennifer, holding her hand. It was a surreal scene. The therapist who had destroyed Jennifer's life now offering solace. But there was something genuine there, something that transcended the previous betrayal. "Are there others?" Jennifer asked softly. "Other mothers like me?" "Yes," Rebecca admitted it. "At least 12 custody cases were directly affected. Others involved treatment recommendations, family interventions, even some hospitalizations that were suggested based on compromised assessments." Phil, who had been listening to everything standing beside the table, finally sat down. He looked exhausted, as if he had aged 10 years in the last few hours. "Rebecca, I need to understand," he said, his voice now carrying less anger and more deep disappointment. "You're a trained psychologist. You knew UKNEW the harm you were causing. How did you rationalize this to yourself? How did you sleep at night?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "I wasn't sleeping. Not really. I was taking pills, drinking wine, and I was convincing myself that I was just adjusting things, that in the end, people were still getting help, that the program was doing more good than harm. But the truth?" She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "The truth is that I was being a coward. I was putting my career, my financial comfort, my professional ego above the real lives of vulnerable people. And there's no rationalization that can justify that." "Why are you confessing now?" Jennifer asked. Rebecca turned to her, and her hands trembled as she gripped Jennifer's tighter. "Because 3 months ago, I saw your name in the news. I saw that you had attempted suicide, that you were in a psychiatric unit, and I realized I might have blood on my hands. Real blood, not metaphorical. Real." She paused, taking a deep breath, as if each word cost a piece of her soul. "I was paralyzed with guilt for weeks. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think of anything else. I started gathering all the evidence, every email, every original document, every recording I had kept over the years as a kind of insurance in case things went wrong. It took time to muster the courage. It took time to accept that I would have to destroy my own career, my reputation, everything I had built. But then, 3 weeks ago, I finally sent the first email to production, because I couldn't live with myself anymore knowing that you almost died because of my lies." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jennifer crying, but these were different tears, not of despair, but of something akin to validation. Her pain, her suffering, her insistence that she was not the person the report described it had all been real. Phil stood up and walked to the window overlooking the studio parking lot. Outside, life went on as normal. Cars passed by. People laughed. The world moved on, oblivious to the earthquake that was happening within those walls. "Marcus," he finally said, without turning around, "you're going to be fired today, and we're going to cooperate fully with any criminal investigation. But more than that, you're going to help us fix this. You're going to give us the names of all the compromised cases, every single one of them." He turned around. "Rebecca, you too. Did you submit your professional license to the state board?" "I already sent the form this morning," she replied. "Okay. And now you're going to work with us to contact each affected family. We'll offer independent evaluations by unaffiliated therapists. We'll correct reports. And we'll provide any evidence necessary for legal reversals when appropriate." He walked over to Jennifer. "And you're going to get your daughters back. I guarantee it. The program's lawyers will represent you pro bono to overturn the custody decision. We'll present the original report as evidence. And we'll make sure Robert knows exactly what happened." Jennifer broke down in tears again, but this time Dr. Phil hugged her, something he rarely did, something that broke with usual professional protocol. But this was no ordinary moment. 3 months later, the cameras rolled again. But this time, it wasn't for a regular episode. It was for something Dr. Phil called the reckoning. The studio was set up differently. There was no usual set. Instead, there was a semicircle of chairs, and in them sat 15 people, 15 of the 43 families affected by the manipulation. Jennifer was there, and beside her, Emma and Sophie, her daughters, who had been returned to her primary custody 2 weeks earlier. There were other parents, other children, all with their own stories of how the falsified assessments had impacted their lives. Dr. Phil stood in the center, and for the first time in his long career, he wasn't in complete control. He was there as a guilty party, as someone whose program had been instrumentalized to cause harm. When I started this program over 20 years ago, and my voice was filled with emotion, I had a simple mission: to help people, to use my platform, my experience, and my voice to make a difference in the lives of families who were suffering. And for many years, I believed that we were doing exactly that. He paused, looking at each face in the semicircle. But somewhere along the way, the line between helping people and entertaining people became blurred. Not for me, or at least I didn't think so, but for others in production, for people I trusted to uphold the show's ethical standards. That line disappeared completely. What Marcus Chen and Dr. Thornton did was unforgivable, but I also have a responsibility here. As executive producer, as the face of the show, I should have been more vigilant. I should have asked more questions. I should have created verification systems that prevented this type of manipulation. One of the mothers in the semicircle raised her hand. Dr. Phil, I appreciate you taking responsibility, but what will change? How can we trust that this won't happen again? Real change, he replied. First, we implemented a new protocol where all psychological evaluations are now conducted by at least 2 independent professionals with no affiliation to the program. Second, we created an ethics oversight board composed of external psychologists who review all cases before recording. Third, we established a compensation fund for all affected families to cover legal costs, therapy, and any other necessary support. He took a deep breath. At fourth, and perhaps most importantly, I made the hardest decision of my career. Dr. Phil, as a daily television program, is over. It ended last season, and it's not coming back. There was a shocked silence in the studio. This doesn't mean I'm giving up on helping people, he continued, but it does mean I'm fundamentally rethinking how to do it in a way that prioritizes ethics over entertainment, substance over sensationalism, and real lives over audience numbers. Jennifer stood up, holding her daughter's hands. Dr. Phil, can I say something? Sure, Jennifer. When I tried to take my life 3 months ago, it wasn't just because I lost my daughters. It was because I lost my faith in anything good in the world. If someone like you, someone who should have been helping, was actually hurting me, then what was left? Well, you stopped the recording that day. You stopped everything and said, no, this isn't right. And that saved more than just my custody. It saved my faith that there are still people who choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. Dr. Phil walked over to a specific camera. The camera he always used for his final moments in each episode, his Dr. Philisms, as the fans called them. If you're watching this at home, he said, looking directly into the lens, I want you to understand something fundamental about integrity. Integrity isn't about doing the right thing when it's easy. Integrity is about doing the right thing when it costs you something, when it threatens your career, when it makes you look bad, when it means admitting you failed. I stopped filming that day because I realized there was something more important at stake than a television episode, more important than ratings, more important even than my own reputation. What was at stake was the real life of a mother and her daughters, and not just theirs, but the lives of dozens of other families who trusted me. He paused, letting the words resonate. We live in an age of reality television, of viral content, of 24/7 entertainment, and somewhere along the way, we forgot that the people on screen aren't characters. They're real human beings with real lives, with real pain. And when you have a platform like mine, you have a sacred responsibility to treat those lives with the respect and dignity they deserve. Marcus Chen forgot this. Dr. Thornton forgot this. And for a while, I also forgot to be as vigilant as I should have been. But today, at this moment, I am making a promise. A promise to Jennifer, to her daughters, to all the families represented here, and to you at home. Never again. I will never again allow entertainment to triumph over ethics. I will never again allow the pursuit of a viral moment to compromise the integrity of the work we do. That's why I stopped recording, because there was a moment when I had to choose between continuing the show or doing the right thing. And when you're forced to make that choice, there's only one acceptable answer. You stop. You stop everything. And you fix it. He looked back at the semicircle of families. These people here are my teachers today. They taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, that admitting mistakes is not defeat, and that true strength lies in getting up and saying, I failed, and I'm going to fix it. If you are facing a situation where someone has betrayed your trust, where the system has failed you, where you feel lost and hopeless, I want you to know that your pain matters. Your story matters. And you deserve justice. Not televised justice, not constructed drama, but real, honest justice based on truth and integrity. Phil finally stepped away from the camera and walked back to the center of the semicircle. The Phil show may be over, but the work of actually helping people, of standing up for what's right, of using whatever platform I have to make a positive difference in the world, that work is just beginning. And this time, we're going to do it the right way. The camera slowly zoomed out, capturing the entire scene, the families, the revamped studio, and Dr. Phil McGraw standing in the center, not as an infallible authority figure, but as a human being who had made mistakes, taken responsibility, and chosen the difficult path of redemption. And then, for the last time in this format, the screen went black.